Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking to Mark Jaworski from HOMAGE Apparel. This one's really cool for me because I've been following HOMAGE Apparel for a long time. They do a lot of great things. They have great product, great apparel, but they do a lot of great things just tapping into the nostalgia side of sports, pop culture, wrestling, Star Wars, you name it. And they just do a lot of cool things, and they really feed on this idea of retro, but also playing off this idea of memories, which is super cool. And I think it's a powerful tool. It's a powerful branding angle. It's a powerful way to kind of create e-commerce because people love what they love, and they love to be reminded of the good old days, those kinds of things. So I just want to read this for you before we start because I think it says a lot about who HOMAGE Apparel is. So this is from actually their website, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's homage.com, and they have all the different shops and the different products, but they also tell their story there, which is super cool. So I want to read this for you. Since 2007, through crafted design, deep cut storytelling, and the legendary comfort, we've been helping fans pay homage to the people, places, and moments that matter most to them. Our iconic H, where is it? Right here, is a way to wear your heart on your sleeve. For the team you love, the player you idolize, and the city you call home. For a favorite movie or a moment or memory you can't help but share. Wear homage and show what you love. So I think that says a lot about who they are. I think it says a lot about their mission and kind of the backstory of why they do what they do, which is super cool. So without further ado, I want to welcome Mark to the podcast. So Mark, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you having you on and talking a little bit about homage and the different things that you guys are doing. My first question, and kind of where I want to start, is because this whole idea of nostalgia and everything that kind of comes with it, it's near and dear to me. I'm into that stuff, but at the same time, you can kind of see it's a trending fad to a degree. So at what point in this process, I know you guys have been at it since 2007, correct?
Yeah, 2007, yeah.
So at what point in that process did you guys realize homage wasn't just about selling shirts anymore, that it was more about selling memories?
I think you probably could argue, and thanks for having me on, by the way.
Of course.
Awesome to be here. I think you could probably argue that might have been from day one. It's kind of, the namesake to be able to pay homage to, different people, heroes, stories in sports and pop culture, the things that we think about as kids, the moments that, you were with your grandparents when this happened, or you were with your buddies in college when that happened, or, whatever it might be. Yeah. But I think that was probably like the kernel of truth for Ryan when he started this brand back in 2007. And I think that was because, one, he's a huge, vintage collector. We have warehouse space upon warehouse space of the different things he's found scouring eBay. And so I think a lot of that nostalgia has always just been very important to him. And then being able to bring that back to life in different ways across, different generations, different licensors, whether that's, NFL or NBA, Major League Baseball, et cetera. So I think when Ryan sat down and was like, hey, I didn't sell some t-shirts, I think that was a big part of what he wanted to do, was to be able to tell these stories and connect people in that way and just kind of reignite that excitement that you might have. You might, oh man, my dad had that shirt. My cousin had that shirt. And seeing things again, for the first time since yesteryear. So that's always, I think, been a core part of our brand identity.
I think it's pretty wild. Like I think back to my own childhood and wishing, God, I wish I still had that t-shirt or that jacket or whatever that is, keeping in mind it probably wouldn't fit me anymore, but right. You just kind of wish you still had it. And it's trippy to a degree when you see, because I have nephews and, I see younger people kind of migrating towards that retro nostalgia stuff, the big head cartoon type, right? The graphic tees, those kinds of things. It's wild to see them migrating towards something that's, at this point, 30, 40 years old. So that said, why? Yeah, what is that? Why do you think people are craving nostalgia harder now and it's picking up steam? What do you think that's about?
It's funny when you say, these things are 40 years old. It's like, oh, they're not that old, are they? And they if you're dipping back into the 90s, it's 40 years old now. So
Yep.
I just think it's one of those things that, you know, it's when you grow up and you're rooting for a team, or you've got the teams that you root for, and you're, like I said, I think your family is a part of this experience, and this is what they experienced when they were younger. It just kind of stands the test of time, I feel, and, you know, it's passed on from different generations, or you pick it up from your friends at school. I distinctly remember kids in school wearing those popover starter jackets, and it's like, so-and-so had the Cowboys one, someone else had the Charlotte Hornets one, you know, someone always had an Alonzo Mourning shirt on, you know, or like even the Rockies in the mid 90s with their color schemes kind of seem to tie into that. But I just think there's something there. And, you know, obviously we've been able to tap into it a little bit on the apparel side of things. And like I said before, just kind of bring those things back to life a little bit, or keep them going. As for why people, you know, connect with that era over others, I guess it's hard to say, but I do think it's something that's just kind of tradition, you know, passed on from, you know, your parents and your friends and stuff like that, and get picked up along the way that way. So
You think that it's almost in some ways becoming almost a form of rebellion in a way to wear vintage, to go after? Because like one of the things I see all the time is it's like everybody wants to defend a certain era of sports. You know, like like I don't really want to jump on the bandwagon of the new age, you know, Timberwolves, for example. I want to kind of talk about the old school stuff. And I feel like it's almost kind of like a battle of these decades, right?
right, yeah, there's something to that. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, the Tampa Bay Bucks were bringing back the creamsicle jerseys. You know, that goes back to, I think, the late 70s, when, you know, when that color scheme and those logos were what they were on the field. It was just like a big deal that, oh man, the Tampa Bay creamsicles. And then suddenly, you know, over the last couple of years, the Seahawks are going back to their 90s and, you know, late 80s, early 90s color scheme. And there's probably a handful of other teams too that are doing that. It is interesting to see kind of where people, for me, like, I don't mean any offense to anyone, but I just don't really care for the early 2000s NBA logos that much. But there are certainly people that, like, those are their favorite logos. That Pistons logo with the horse and like the tailpipes coming off the side. Like, those are, like, for them, that's the best Pistons logo that there ever is. For me, I kind of like, you know, the ball with the Detroit Pistons in it more than that. It's like the early 2000s, but, you know, so I guess it's just one of those things where, you know, you said rebellion earlier. I think people want to celebrate their teams, but they don't always want to do it with the same, you know, the same shirt or the same hat that everyone else has. You know, there is, you want to be, even within your community, you want to be maybe a little bit different than someone else. So, you know, retro logos it's hard to, especially for baseball. There's so many. I mean, you know, we're talking about the Cubs celebrating 150 seasons this year, and 150 years, you get a lot of logos in that amount of time. I think the Braves also turn 150 this year. And, you know, there's just the logo history is just so vast. And it's very easy to latch on to this logo or that logo because there's just a lot to choose from. So it's fun too. You know, it's like you said, it's just a way to be a little bit different within the fandom, you know, within that community, rooting for a specific team.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to make this a technical conversation, but I think some of it too is that they're looking back at more of an analog existence versus a digital existence as well. Because when you look back at some of these brands, and even, you know, just some of the designs, like, they weren't as easily as accessible. Like, if you were from a small town, or if you know, only went school shopping once a year kind of a thing, you kind of had what you had, and your buddies had what they had, and it was like, oh, that's an awesome shirt or whatever, but it was so condensed, where accessibility, I think, kind of makes people appreciate that nostalgia a little bit more, because back in the day, things were not that accessible.
Yeah, we were talking about that a couple of days ago here at the office. It started with music. It's like, oh, you would go to a house if you wanted to listen to the CD. It's like, okay, what's a CD? Or you would go to someone else's house if you wanted to play this specific video game, because not everyone had everything. Not that everyone has everything now, but, you know, it's a lot different with, you know, with Apple Music or Spotify, and you can pull up any song at any time. You know, you had to know somebody. If you wanted to listen to something, you either had to listen to the radio for 10 hours straight with your hand on the record button, you know, button ready to record it onto a cassette, or you had to know someone who had it. But yeah, it's just a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit different now. So, perhaps some of the folks that are younger than you and I are looking to see what that experience was like.
Yeah. So I know what it's like to start a brand and to see some success in some different things, especially in the retro space. When you start doing it, you get a lot of suggestions. Oh, you guys should do this. And what about this? Are you ever going to do something like this? How do you preserve the soul of the brand when it starts to scale? I mean, naturally you want to start to accommodate all these requests, but at the same time, it's like we started it for a reason. How do you stay that course?
Yeah, that's a trick. It really is. There's so much that we can do with a given team's IP. And then there's also, we do a lot of co-brands where you can have multiple, you can have a pop culture, something like Star Wars, and you can intersect it with the Raiders and come up with something that's really interesting. And those kind of permutations, I feel, are endless. I think for us, the first filter that we try to put it through is, that storytelling filter. We talked about that a little bit already. Does this story matter to people? Does it resonate with people? Is it something that they're going to connect to? If the answer to that question is yes, then I think, okay, what's next for that idea? And if not, then maybe we come back to it, at another time, or try to think about it in a different way. But just filtering everything through storytelling is maybe one way to try to organize, because like you said, it's just endless, the amount of things or the ways you can present product to customers. And we've taken plenty of cuts and misses in our time where we think, hey, this would be really awesome. People are going to really respond to this, and maybe they don't. And there's been things where we haven't maybe given as much thought to it, and suddenly it's like, wow, people really like this idea. And, you might accidentally back into some pretty good ideas that work out that way. So it's always a little bit of trial and error, just trying to figure out what folks are going to respond to. But I think centering the story is, no matter what we decide to do, that is always something that we want to be able to, share with our audience.
I'll preface this next question with just the idea that, never say never, but are there any instances in sports, pop culture, whatever it is that Homage just intentionally refuses to participate in or modernize? Some examples would be, some of the buzz around Hulk Hogan, whether it's OJ Simpson, or are there certain ones where you're like, we're just not going there?
Those are good questions. Each one's its own conversation. So I wouldn't say there's a rule set that we follow necessarily. We work a lot with team shops too, who, they know their fans really well. If we're working with the Royals team shop, or we're working with, the Cavs team shop, hey, these are the stories that we want to chase. We think these are valid. If the team feels like it works or is appropriate, then like that, that's a big consideration for us too. I don't want to say like we avoid stuff, but there's probably certain players that we just like, we wouldn't necessarily pursue an OJ Simpson thing at this point in time. There's also like, I don't know, there's not always much to gain from it. And you could sell some shirts doing that, but then, is it worth typing out responses on social media all the time for that, for a few $100 of sales? Maybe not. So
it's like, it's like the Jose Canseco. It's the, those kinds of things where there's still, I feel like there's a fan base and there's probably opinions on both sides of the aisle, but you can't deny their impact on the culture of when they were what they were, whether it's Dennis Rodman or, anyone really.
Yeah. And I think, we always try to play, not that adversity doesn't exist, but we like stories when people are overcoming adversity, or stories where people persevere in, the face of different challenges. We feel like those are the most meaningful things. And so, if someone gets knocked down, in the course of their career, and they're able to come back around, or, public opinion changes on things, it's funny you mentioned Canseco. I think of, guys from the steroid era, like McGuire and, Palmeiro and some of the others. And like, the criticism was very, very sharp for those players at that time. I think people have viewed, just within, baseball, I think people have viewed the contributions of those players differently today than they did 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when, they were testifying before Congress and all that. So, things change over time. And like you said, it's hard to talk about the history of the home run without talking about Mark McGwire or Sammy Sosa. You can object to the way maybe they got to some of those numbers, or if you want to put a little asterisk by some of those records, that's fine. But like, they're certainly part of the story. So it's interesting. It's a good question. I think it's probably one of the more challenging questions that we face here as a brand is, deciding, hey, let's do this, or no, let's not do it. Some of them, like I said, the OJ one maybe is a little more obvious than some of the others, like, with McGuire and in Bonds and things like that. There's the spirit of the rule. I don't know. I'm a baseball fan. I have an opinion, I suppose. There's other, baseball writers that have their opinions. At the time, a lot of the drugs that they were using maybe weren't illegal. They are now. Maybe they weren't illegal, so they didn't know. You can, like you said, you're going to get people on both sides of the argument making interesting points. So, it's one of those things where each individual instance, I think we just kind of just review it on a case-by-case basis. So,
and I didn't ask you that to put you on the spot. Part of it is, my feeling on it is that having grown up in those eras and kind of having a different respect for nostalgia, like I just look at it within its nostalgia box or window of time. It's like, even, I'm not defending OJ by any means. I don't know what he did or didn't do. I'm not a lawyer or a cop, but he was a hell of a running back. That's where like that's where I'm kind of like, yeah, let's just leave it at that. Or even, and I think it's tricky too, because for anybody younger that wants to like go research a Michael Jordan or even like you said, a Jose Canseco, you can find mountains of stuff that say good, bad, or otherwise. But when you were living through it, you just got what you got in regards to news. If it wasn't on Sports Center, you didn't know any different. So like, even not that long ago, I was debating LeBron Jordan to my nephew. And he's like, well, yeah, you're just saying that because it's Jordan. And I'm like, no, but you have to understand, when you live through Jordan, he wasn't a legend until a certain point. And you know what I mean? He was just a player like everybody else up to a certain point. He wasn't a legend in 1985.
Yeah.
So and I think that's the same for your Mark McGuire's and your Deion Sanders or whatever. And to me, that nostalgia of like primetime, for example, we didn't know what that looked like. And now today, kids look at it and they think, oh my God, that's amazing. And it's like, yeah, but at the time it was pretty weird and it was pretty out there. And it was pretty, like, a lot of, like I would say the old hats, a lot of those guys hated it because he was cocky. Oh.
Yeah.
So
yeah, every perspective, like you said, living through it provides one perspective. Looking back on it provides another, and living through it and looking back, being able to do both is also interesting. And yeah, with Canseco and some of those others, I don't know. It's just like you said, that whole Canseco was a part of that home run chase, but that home run chase was at 98 with Griffey, Sosa, McGuire was at 90. That was the only thing on Sports Center. It's like, all right, here's the 3 highlights for these 3 teams.
It was amazing.
Here's who's doing what, and they put the graphic up, and like, here's how many home runs they have. Here's what they're on pace to get. Here's the record. That was it, and you were just locked into that for 3-4 months out of the season. It was nuts, and like that provides a very different experience than someone who just kind of turns on the TV and there's a couple of guys in suits and ties talking about, did they take performance enhancing drugs or not during that time? And what does that mean? And all this other stuff. So, living through it, like you said, is always going to be, I think, different than looking back. And that it kind of is what it is at some point with being able to, and not everyone has, I didn't live through, stuff that happened in the 70s and 80s. Like, I didn't get to experience it firsthand, the way like I experienced sports in the 90s and 2000s. So I'm sure, talk to my dad or my grandfather, and they'll have different opinions on who the best NBA player was. And maybe it wasn't LeBron or Jordan. Maybe it's somebody else. Right. Yes, my uncle, it was Larry Bird.
Wow. That's a lot of people, actually. That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, bottom line is I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I do think you've carved out a niche for yourself, and I hope you guys do it for a very long time. So thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate the chat. And if you're up to it, maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, anytime. You got, like you said, you have my email now. So flood the inbox with whatever you need, and we're here to help out. So, like I said before, thanks for having me on. And it's cool to be able to talk with folks about, what we do, what we try to do, the different things that we're trying to do for our audience. So,
Very cool. Thanks, Mark.
all right. Thank you.